Thank you for joining with us for this latest episode of the Starfish and Church podcast. Today, we are delighted. We're really excited, Rob Wegner and I are, that you're joining us for this latest episode, that we're going to have our longtime friend, Brian Sanders with us today. Brian, as a social entrepreneur, has helped to start hundreds of missional enterprises, including churches, nonprofits, businesses all over the world. And most notably, Brian is the founder and former executive director of the Underground Network based out of Tampa, Florida. It's an international fellowship of microchurch incubators that create city-based ecosystems of faith, creativity, and empowered social enterprise. And so currently, Brian works with the National Christian Foundation, forming collaborative communities, and also CoHatch, which we're going to ask him about, which is a national network of co-working spaces. Brian, thanks for being with us today, brother.
What's up, man? Good to see you guys.
So glad you're here. I just want to know, is that bio true or are you just making things up?
That's a long bio.
Is it bad?
Well, it didn't even mention the book.
It's amazing, bro.
And it did not even mention all his great books, which are great.
It's
seriously.
true.
Didn't even mention.
Do you have multiple bios? Because I have like bios that are embarrassing, bios that are bios that are for business, bios that are for ministry.
Boasting bios, humble bios.
No, seriously, man. You know what? While he was reading that, my heart was filled with affection for who you are. And
amen.
I fell back to thinking about, when we launched about 5.5 years ago, Can't See It Underground. You come in to spend a week with us here, and how grateful I am, man, for your friendship, your brotherhood, your leadership, your example, and so grateful. Thank you for being a father and a brother to many.
Yeah,
the feeling is mutual.
Thanks, my man.
So, Brian, this sounds almost obvious, but for our listeners that may not know a lot about Brian Sanders and about your background, would you tell us a little bit about your story? First of all, how you met Jesus, and then a little bit about what you're currently on about.
It's interesting. Have you ever heard of something called the Bader-Meinhof effect, or also known as the frequency illusion? Essentially, it's like if you're interested in buying a certain kind of car, and suddenly that you see that car everywhere,
right?
And you think, wait, what? I want a Jeep, and now everybody has a Jeep. Of course, they were always there. You just now suddenly are paying attention to it. So I feel that way a little bit about collaboration, which I know we're going to talk about. We're probably going to drift into that conversation. But I was thinking about how I became a Christian is because I kind of had a little bit of a troubled home. And so I thought I need to be the man of the house. And so I would ride my bike to church. I'd be like 11, 12 years old, and my bike to this church near our house, just sit in the back. I had no idea what was going on. Sit back with the old ladies. It was a Presbyterian church. And that church, as was custom at the time, had a partnership with Young Life, with the parachurch ministry called Young Life, which was, elite level youth work, essentially. And so they would either pay, I don't know if they pay part of the Young Life person's salary or fully pay the salary, and they worked at the church, but they were also allowed to go into schools and do Young Life. And that kind of partnership, that strategic collaboration, allowed me to have this kind of incredible youth specialist, essentially, in that church, see me, sitting in the back, and pull me into not just a youth group, but into Young Life, which is a missionary thing to high schools. So then I had access to Young Life camps, and actually that's where I became a Christian, was at Southwind Young Life camp at like 13, 14. So interesting, isn't it, how, nothing is really done alone. No great kingdom thing happens alone. And that's part of my story too. I see that now. And then I went into college ministry out of college, worked for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. And so again, parachurch, the relationship between the parachurch and the church has always been this kind of liminal edge of my own
Mm,
world, life, heart.
mm-hmm,
I feel like essentially a missionary, a missionary person. But then what is our relationship to the church, to ecclesia, and like trying to negotiate that? And then what is the underground? The underground is an attempt to renegotiate with the church as a missionary person with a bias towards mission, with empowerment, with flattening structures, whatever. So yeah, I don't know if that's exactly, but that's part of my story.
Yeah, that's great. And especially those highlights about how collaboration works. So
mm-hmm.
tell us a little bit about, and then we'll work backwards and we'll work through some things as we converse today. Uh, explain to everyone what Cohatch is, what what that's all about, and what you've been involved in for the last few years.
Yeah, so I probably have three kind of areas that I work in right now. One is the kind of philanthropy side with the foundation, and then the for profit, which is primarily working with Cohatch and supporting them, which is it's just a beautiful for profit, heart driven company that's trying to build ecosystems, like mixed
Mm,
economy ecosystems in cities. So it is co-working, but it's more than co-working. It's also, it's essentially community building uh, between, you know, faith-based nonprofits, non-faith-based nonprofits, for-profit, civic enterprise, trying to
mm,
create a space that's neutral where everyone can work and somehow something magical happens, that
mm,
cross pollination that can happen through that. Of course, as a missionary person, you're like, this is like utopia, because you're surrounded by people in a way that isn't awkward or contrived or forced, which is actually authentic community with all kinds of different people. And so that's what they're trying to do. They wanted to come into Florida, so I built a relationship with a couple of the principals and just trying to help them enter Florida well and build a number of these locations. And so, yeah, I just really love that company and happy to work alongside them.
mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Brian, um, I think it was at the microchurch conference. Uh, you talked about the most needed skill, or I think actually the word you used was technology, for the future of anyone who wants to be um, a pioneer in terms of kingdom impact. In that context, we were talking about networks of microchurches, that the most needed technology or skills collaboration, but it seems to be the one we know the least about in the West. And and even if you look at our heroes, like in the East, it's always teams like the Power Rangers versus
Right,
Superman. And in
right,
the
right.
West, it's like the solo heroic leader, you know. So can you unpack that? What do you mean that it's the most needed technology and we know the least about it here in the West?
Yeah, I mean that's that great man myth, right? In the West we think history is shaped by the actions of great men,
Mm,
and even that is like it's just a choice, it's a narrative, it's a way of telling stories that isn't real.
mm,
There is no such thing as a singular leader. There's no Steve Jobs without Steve Wozniak.
mm-hmm,
Yes.
There's no Bill Gates without Paul Allen.
Yeah.
mm-hmm,
Actually, and even if you think about what is the most successful quiet, enterprise in our time is really Google. And Google is Sergey Brin and Larry Page. It's a partnership, but nobody writes biographies about those guys.
You know what's
yeah,
funny? Let me interject here. It's always bothered me for years. People, they'll say, especially even in the context of pastor, you can't be a lone ranger. You can't be. It's like, what about Tonto? Why do we always forget Tonto?
The Lone
Tonto was
Ranger wasn't
always
alone. Yeah.
he was always bailing the Lone Ranger out of stuff, man.
yeah, he would have been a dead carcass a long time
The,
ago, man.
the Lone Ranger was not by himself. I'm sorry. I've been waiting years to
What
get
a
that off
great
my chest.
what a great observation. And yet that's the way we title the show, right? That
Yeah.
you have
Right.
to. So even though in real life nobody can survive without a partner or without partners or without
Yeah.
teams, it would stretch credulity. You wouldn't believe the story if it was just really truly one person. But I mean, again, why don't we have a biography? Why is nobody writing about Paige and Bryn? Not
Mm,
really, because we don't know what to do with that. We don't know what to do with a team, with a
yeah.
partnership that succeeded. It doesn't fit into the great man myth thing. I mean, Tasha Eurich has said that the meta skill of the 21st century is self awareness. So I tend to agree. I think there's three big kind of missing skill sets in the time in which we live. I would agree. Self awareness is one. I think learning, the ability to learn, not what you know, it's what you can learn and how fast you can learn, how comfortable you are with learning. And then the third would be collaboration. Like, how good are you at working with equals, with people that um, don't work for you? So we understand teams and we understand collaboration. That has been a part of our enterprise. Of course, it has.
Mhm.
And if you talk about collaboration, you're primarily talking about teams you run or teams you own. It's still within hierarchies. It's still within
Mhm.
triangles. And you can assert a certain kind of leadership or a certain kind of directional force on a collaboration that you own, that they all work for you, Um, but what do you do when it's true equals, when you have like a cross organizational collaboration where they all have different boards of directors, they all have different purposes, they all have different constituents or stakeholders that they're trying to satisfy in some way. When those people come into a room, how do they work together? To me, so
Mhm.
Rob, that's the social technology of collaborating across organization
Mhm.
that I think we have very little experience doing.
Mhm.
So even Christians, I mean, we did some research about a year ago in this region where I'm at in Central Florida, and we interviewed 100. We did kind of ethnographic interviews of 100 senior pastors in the area, and we were asking about, like, do you think unity and collaboration is important, or do you think it's even a theological mandate? And listen,
Mhm.
guys, 100% said it was a biblical idea. So I think this is really important. So everybody agrees we ought to be doing it. Like to a person, they agree. But then when asked, why aren't we? We don't have ideas. We're not sure. It's just a blind spot. It's sort of like, yeah, we probably should be doing that, but it's too hard and it's not going to work. And
Mm,
we tried it 15 years ago or something like that. So it's such a strange thing that actually the thing we all have unity on, we have the greatest level of unity agreement on, is that we ought to be in unity,
Mhm.
collaborative agreement in mission or action or something for the flourishing of our cities. So that the thing we actually have agreement on theologically, 100% agreement on, is that we probably should be working together. We just don't know how. So it
yeah.
exposes a real gap in our
Mhm.
learning, in our skill set. And look, pastors are probably like anybody. They don't necessarily want to wade into waters they're not comfortable in or they're not competent in. If you don't know how to do a thing, like if you're not good with building stuff or whatever, you don't really want to go into the construction group that's working on things, or you don't really know about
Yeah.
IT, you back off of the technology stuff.
And what strikes me too is you talked about the self-awareness and then also the willingness to learn. So, any collaborative thing I've been a part of, it's been fruitful. Number one, I want to say it goes very, very slow. Um, that's very difficult for people to sign on to.
Good point.
But the other thing that's an interesting dynamic that happens is there's some kind of vision that makes us transcend whatever our organizational's vision and capacity is. And then we have to stay together long enough to do this channel switching between um, like everybody needs to lead here and everybody needs to follow here. Everybody needs to be a teacher here and everybody needs to be a student. And you have to keep like it's constantly, it'll happen like 100 times in a 2 hour conversation. Like, how do people develop that capacity? I know you've spent a lot of time working on these kind of collaborative movements. How do people begin to upgrade in that ability to flow from student, teacher, follower, leader?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, what I hear underneath the question is it something that can be learned, or is it something that's more innate to a certain kind of leader? And I'm to be honest with you, I'm not sure. I'm torn. Like, there's a part of me that thinks that just some people just carry a kind of humility or slash commitment to something so big and so important to them
Oof.
that they will put down pettiness. They will push past the things that make us go, I don't really love working with this person, or I don't love working with that group over there. So it's either an internal personal humility or even organizational humility. I mean, there are organizations that carry a culture of like modesty and learning and openness, but also I just care about this thing out here. So it's so important that I'll keep pushing through the slowness of this. And, but I will say this, there are characteristics as we have tried to curate what is like the bedrock or the foundation of some of these collaborative communities. When you're trying to build an alliance across a cause and you're trying to say marshal 100 agencies, you're looking for 20 that are like run by people that just have something, a sense of mutuality. They can think globally. They carry humility. They can put down their organizational concerns when they come into that room that you're talking about, Robin. Some people just can't. I mean, some people, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and they're always going to keep bringing it back to what their organization does. Yeah. And they're always going to be trying to position or jockey to gain something, some advantage in the conversation. And those people, while on the one hand are a great gift to their mission, and if I was on their board, I'd be like, that's my boy, but, but man, in that room, they're a nightmare. They are not helping work towards collaboration. You have to almost like put down, you have to take off your organizational hat and go, okay, what is this bigger thing and how am I a part of it? And Rob, I just think some people can do that and some people can't. Now, can it be learned? Maybe, probably, but we probably need a generation to teach it or for them to see it and to have models or examples of people that, I mean, this as well as both of you know this as well as anybody. We have some unlearning to do in terms of our leadership paradigms. And it's not just that we have to pick up a new approach or a new competency or even a new identity. Like, Lance, the stuff you've written and thought about leadership, you can't just pick up this other thought or approach on leadership. You can't bolt it onto your existing stuff. So the fault line for me has always been 20th versus 21st century. I think about all the stuff I sort of have problems with or rail against is a 20th century model. So I don't even want to be critical of it in its own time. That's not for me to say if in 1975 this was a good approach to leadership, mystique and smoke-filled rooms and mountaintop thought leadership or something. Okay, I don't know if that was good, bad, or indifferent then, but I know it's not good now. I know it's not temporally contextual. And so we have a new thing we have to do. And so younger leaders are just going to they're indigenous to that way of thinking. But guys that are a little bit older, like us, what do? We either have that openness and humility because we've been broken by life or exhaustion or something, or we're just going to have to let go massively of that former approach, which we have believed was the way to go.
Boy, that's so good. Now, there's, and what you're talking about there, Brian, this relearning and this unlearning. I think one of the difficulties in it is that you have not only just leaders of today that are needing to relearn these paradigms of, decentralized, non-hierarchical, collaborative, but the people that we've labeled as followers have to relearn it too, because people very much want to find somebody to quote follow. We want that hero type of person, like you were mentioning earlier. And so, there's a two prongs here that are having to relearn and rededicate themselves. And it seems like that the common denominator that we're looking for is King Jesus, and Jesus as the head of the church, or the head of our faith-based enterprise. So there is a lot of difficulty, a lot of unlearning here to go, that it makes me sometimes wonder if in our lifetime we'll fully see it realized, or if we're just more sowing the seeds for what we're hoping to happen in the next generation.
Yeah. So I wrote a little book on what I call the 5 keys to cross organizational collaboration, and one of them is exhaustion. So this is this is the idea. So the idea is so what I'm saying, Lance, is I think there is hope for some older leaders if they can get to the point of having depleted their own resources. So there's that place where we can get where we're sort of out of energy, we're out of juice. We tried everything we know to try,
Yes.
but we haven't quit. You know what I mean? There's that moment. There's that little space in between. I did everything I know to do. I'm out. Like my gas tank is deep.
Yep.
Exhaustion, not in a sense of like, I can't
I'm
work.
a witness.
Yeah, you know, but like I have exhausted all of my personal resources, you know.
Yes.
And I still want this thing to happen. I still believe that it's possible. I still have this hope. And that those people, if we can catch them at that moment of exhaustion, and we can see a greater transcendent kind of goal, and then we find each other in that moment, those people can play. They can get to the table and they can go, okay, I'm up for it. Look, I've tried everything else. And ironically, well, maybe it's not ironic, but one of some of the people that have been hardest to work with in the collaborative space are mega church, young, successful, growing church leaders. And part of the reason why is because they just haven't come to the end of themselves yet. You know, they're still harboring hope.
Can I give you a triple click on that?
They're
Click
still
1. Ready? Right, here we go. Click 1, ego. Click 2, economics. Click 3, ecclesiology.
Yeah. That works. Well,
But
and I'm coming as someone who's repented out of that.
Yes.
I'm not coming like above everybody else.
But even those
it's
guys,
like you got to get exhausted at.
They can run out.
Exactly.
But I think if you're 35 and it's working and everything's growing, there's still a part of you that thinks, you may not say it out loud, but there's still a part of you that thinks we may be the church to reach the whole city. We may be the one ministry that's going to finally solve every problem or reach because we'll just keep growing. Like it's a hockey stick and there's no end to this growth, and we're going to be the ones, and I'm going to be able to sit at the top of that heap. And the truth is, I hope that's true. You know, maybe there will be an example of that, but there hasn't been one yet. And there is a cliff for that at some point, or a peak or whatever. And I almost think you have to run that race. You just have to, like, young leaders need to be allowed to just go for it. And then we'll be over here waiting.
We'll be on the porch waiting
for the collaboration. When you're ready,
come back up here with your tail between your legs. And that's so true. Now, as you were talking, Brian, about that, it reminded me of, there was he's passed away now, but in fact, he was one of my profs at Fuller. I don't know if you read so many books. Mark Driscoll says he reads a book a day. Brian Sanders actually reads a book a day. So at least close to it. But Ray Anderson was a prof at Fuller, and Ray used to say, God's grace presupposes barrenness on our part before he acts. And, you just look at all the examples throughout the scriptures, and you look at the different barren women, with, starting with Sarah, and Rebecca, Rachel. I mean, you go on and on and on. And these people, Moses comes to the end of him. So it's all, Daniel, his dream is dead. You go on and on and on. you have to come to the barren womb, the place where you're like, I got nothing, Lord. And I really do believe what you just said is a huge truth. And if there is success, if there is, like you said, if if the metrics are going up on that hockey stick scale, it's hard to back off. It's hard to lay it down. Everybody's
Yeah.
patting you on the back. It's all looking good.
And they're busy. They're occupied by their own enterprise. And again, maybe that's fine. Maybe that's good. Maybe we need a few people like that in the city that are just, they're being fruitful, good things are happening. That's fine. But what about the rest of us? And the truth is, if you have one or two, like in our region, there's 1,800 churches. So if you have one or two that are kind of in that growth cycle and they just believe in themselves and whatever, okay. What are the other 1,798 churches do? And what are the other 1,000 or 2,000 parachurch nonprofits, faith-based entrepreneurs, companies? What do they do? So I think there's this whole frontier, rather than just thinking about the outlier church leader person. There's this whole frontier of unactivated leaders that are ready to partner with each other for some great cause. Interestingly enough, I think that's also one of the struggles. So because of my work with the foundation, I've been able to convene about 9 of these cause alliances. And in each case, the faster you can come to a transcendent goal, like a thing that we go, yeah, we all want that. Like working with foster care and adoption, we all want a safe, loving home for every child. Like whether that's permanent, temporary, fostered, back with their family, non-family member. It doesn't matter. Just every child deserves that. And there's not a person in that field or that cause that doesn't go, yeah, that's what I want. And almost like, I'll lay down my life for that. I'll partner with you, even though you're annoying for that. But the irony, guys, is that, and I'd be interested to know what you think about this or why this is, but the church, we don't have something like that. We struggle to articulate a single thing that we all want. And I don't know if that's because we've just kind of reduced the work of the church or the work of ministry to growing my church. Like, I think if you're a pastor or a leader of a ministry, at one level you think, well, what am I living for? What am I trying to accomplish? I'm trying to accomplish the growth or success of this one mission, this one piece of this thin slice of the whole kingdom enterprise. And then when we get together, so what's the big thing we all dream about? It's like hard to say. It's hard to
I
articulate.
have a story, man.
Yeah.
For me, it was this really was a fork in the road. It was in 2001. A guy who had been my mentor, who was director of church planning for an organization called the Bible League. He's a real Barnabas. Like, he just finds young Pauls and just pours into them. Has raised up those kind of apostolic leaders in 50-something nations. No one's ever heard of him. No one will ever hear of him. He just disappears in the background. But he had found 7 guys like this in southern India, and they all had their own little networks of a handful of micro churches. I didn't have the language of that. I was just like, yeah, they have these little churches and they don't own buildings, and you meet under banyan trees. And he's like, I want you to meet these guys. They're forming a kind of a new network, a new team. I was like, I'm there. And they were meeting that week to dream together about what God was calling them to do together. And Ron had a map prepared that had pins of like, here's every village in Tamil Nadu, southernmost state in India, that has some kind of gospel presence, witness. And then here's all the ones that don't. Here's where all the unreached people groups are, the unengaged people groups. And first of all, we began in prayer. And unlike in the West, where it's like we tip a hat and then we get our left brains going and get to work on how we're going to, do X, Y, and Z, and who's the biggest person in the room with the biggest vision. And then can we get everyone to align behind that person's vision? Like, they start praying, and it's like hours and hours later, I'm like, oh. So that was one thing. It was like, we're going to sit here and just be constantly discerning in the presence of Jesus leading this meeting. And I was like, whoa, I've never been in this long and this immersive of an experience of like this flow. And then like somewhere around later half of that day, I began to realize like they're dreaming about, they're literally asking the question, what is it going to take to get to everyone on this map?
Hmm.
And it was like a fuse blew in my brain. And I was like, oh God, I'm so sorry. I'm still thinking about how many people are coming to my church, how many people we baptized last year. And I left, I left that weekend. I was like, man, I got to work with anybody, like anybody in my town who
Yeah.
sees what I saw. Like, I got to find who those people are and I got to become their friends. And it really changed the whole course of my life. So
Hmm.
I so resonate, man, with what you're saying. It's like there's something that's so transcendent
Hmm.
that you're like, and I am so limited. It's a healthy shame. It's like, I am so limited.
Hmm.
I desperately need like all these other people. And it's like a miracle. You can't give that to people.
Yeah.
You know what I
Are
mean?
you?
It's like, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, I exactly. And I think when those moments happen, they can change the complete trajectory of our lives as a leader, because you see a thing that's worth the pain, the uncertainty, the sacrifice of working with other people that you don't control, working with other systems that you don't control. Um, are you guys familiar with the work of a guy called Dan Pelota? Uh,
Guess why I am.
oh, good. You got that. Okay, good. Yeah, yeah.
When you mentioned a book, bro, I
Did you-
ordered it.
have you read it yet? Have you read that yet?
I just started. I
Okay,
literally
okay.
just started last night. I got it a couple days ago.
So that little monograph is really provocative, and essentially he's looking at 1961, and JFK stands up to the world and says, "We're going to put a man on the moon and get him back." By the way, so that's half the problem is
Yeah.
returning him alive somehow.
Yeah.
Um, by 1970. So, and his argument is that that was as impossible of a proposition as any social problem we currently face. So the technology available to us in 1961, I mean, the best computer we had was like a calculator. So how were we going to, with the resources we currently had, do that, achieve that? And so he says that becomes like it's a sort of modern miracle of how in 9 years they were able to achieve that goal. But he says the two reasons why that happened. One was the call that Kennedy makes, and that call was timed, that essentially it had a deadline,
Hmm.
to say we're going to do this, not someday, but we're going to do this in 9 years. Like somehow we're going to do this impossible thing in 9 years. And then what it took was his argument is it took NASA. And NASA is the quintessential example of a convener, a neutral convener. NASA was it's not really hierarchies. NASA essentially had to work with 40,000 entities that were not NASA, that didn't work for NASA. So you're talking about 40,000 universities and engineers and engineering companies and manufacturing companies. And
Wow.
NASA didn't make anything, right? NASA didn't make the modules. It just coordinated all the makers, and it coordinated all these people that had something to bring to this incredible goal, right? And to see the whole picture and to be the kind of like neutral, trusted convener. So his argument is it becomes an impossible social problem is possible to solve in a short period of time, in less than a decade, because there was a huge goal that had a time limit on it, and because there was this thing that could convene, that could coordinate everyone. So you end up having, I mean, NASA goes from like, I don't know, 6,000 employees to 36,000 employees. Of course, its budget goes way up, but its real magic was its ability to coordinate everyone else, coordinate all these businesses and universities and whatever. So when we talk about collaboration and social change, and when we think about the big goal of the church being the church everywhere, or somehow delivering the good news of the kingdom in a way that I don't know, solves social problems and brings flourishing to our cities, you're talking about the need for a big goal, which we struggle to articulate. And also, are we set up as conveners? Do we have the kind of neutrality? And we don't, because we're fragmented and siloed. We barely can communicate with each other. The average church or ministry might have 2 or 3 other connections beyond their own sphere with other churches or ministries. It's incredibly, siloed. And then we have almost no relationship with civic, government, arts, education, So to my mind, and we're starting to see these examples pop up around the country and around the world, we could step more into that convener space, that NASA space, which is some of what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to learn about and write about now, is figuring out how do we do that? What does that look like? And in my view, and maybe I'm biased, I think we're the best people to do it. I think Christians carry that deeper theological commitment that will drive us and can help us be that neutral convener for everyone.
Mm. Brian, I was wondering, with the work that you've done, creating these collaborative communities for collective impact in Tampa, for example, you talked about, I don't know if all 9 of those collaborations were in Tampa or not, but we'd love to hear just a story or two of something that made you hopeful, where it seemed like there was some kind of flow that was transcending, you know what I mean? Just the sum of the parts. Do you have any stories you could share, 1 or 2?
Yeah, I think probably the most encouraging thing that's happened in that, because I'm tentative about it. I still think I'm not ready to say, much has been achieved. I think, I mean, me, I probably need 10 years into a thing before I can actually say it worked. But what I can say is that there's a moment here. There's like the willingness, the openness, the tenderness even of heart of leaders to say, yeah, I'm open to this. And it hasn't been that hard to convene, say, in anti-human trafficking or foster care and adoption, to just call all the faith-based agency heads and say, will you come together? Will you come around a table? Now, again, being a part of a foundation, that as a neutral convener, that's a part of the secret sauce. I mean, I think if one organization tries to do that, and this is part of the problem, is that we look around and go, well, whose job is it to convene the collaboration? Nobody. And then this is also trick. And Lance, you'll appreciate this. The people that would think I could do that, I should do that, that's like the last person you want doing it. The person that goes, I could never do that. Like, why me? I would never be the one. That's probably the person you would want to convene it. So it's like,
that was always my litmus test for choosing elders when I was pastor, and was the
if they wanted to be one.
I'm like, do you want to be an elder? Yep. Okay. Nah, you're out.
We'll wait till next year. Give you more time.
Yeah.
So it's like, who's the convener? And then I think beginning to see that when you make those calls, people come, people answer that call. And then not everyone, but I would say the majority of those people, they just bring a willingness that I have not seen, in my lifetime, in my ministry lifetime, my career, and an openness to say, okay, if someone can help us do this, if someone can figure out the social technology of how to do this in a way that someone doesn't take advantage, or someone doesn't cannibalize it, or someone doesn't take credit for it, where it truly is co-creative, it's a generative process, and it isn't actually some bait and switch where somebody had a vision the whole time and was going to just take credit for it. That's the trick, guys. That's the trick. Because you have alpha leaders. I mean, I'm not going to name it, but there's one collaboration in particular where we should collaborate. That's the thing to do. That's the moment. And around this certain space, which I don't want to say what it is, that leader came in and said, okay, we're going to do this. They got everybody around the table, and then they just started telling them what to do. They started aligning and providing vision. And Lance, to your point, there is a part of you that goes, okay, good. Or there's a part of you that thinks, well, what's the vision? Because we're transactional. So we think, okay, well, what are you asking? How much time is it going to take? How much money will it cost? Who's in charge? And where are we going? And that's how we have decided whether we participate in things in the 20th century. Because we make some kind of transactional calculus on, can my organization do this? What do I get out of it? What's my return on that investment? What's the value add for this for my organization? And that itself, that posture, that approach is corrosive to the whole idea. To come in transactionally is already a breach and an undermining of the whole idea, because the whole idea is like, somehow we have to wrestle out of each other collaboration. We have to wrestle out of each other a greater thing together than what we have apart. And that's going to take all of us trying to work at it, bringing something to the table, pulling at each other, getting over each other. And we don't know what it is yet. And if somebody shows up the day one of a collaboration and says, we know where this is going, leave. Like, go start over.
Yes.
That's a terrible thing to say, but maybe have a conversation with them and say, can we off that? Can we do it together? Can we figure it out together? Because that's that co-creative process. So I'm not giving you a specific story, but I will say
it's okay. Yeah.
The meta story is that there's an openness, and there's a moment here where we're willing. People are willing to step into something together.
So good. Hey, before we've got a few more minutes here, and so let's just step back into the microchurch world, microchurch conversation a little bit, because that's such the Lord is breathing on that. We know, just like what was in 2024 here, just a few months ago, the second microchurch conference was in Kansas City, and I think there was over 700 people there, probably about another 300 or so online. So the Lord's breathing on this thing. So would you kind of give us that 10,000 foot view, Brian, the narrative arc of what you see has happened over the last decade and kind of what you see coming in 1970 ahead of us?
Interesting question. Yeah, I think obviously the idea of a microchurches or decentralized church or empowered, kind of like giving the church back to the priesthood, is no longer seen as threatening, maybe, or it's slowly moving from the fringe, the sort of lunatic fringe of church, to something a little more usable. So probably where we are is you have the kind of innovators who have been working on it now for a decade or more, some cases two, and in very, very few cases, multiple decades, even before us. And I think those people are at a certain place of maturity and development. But then I think the church at large, the inherited model, whatever, the legacy church, is starting to say, can we integrate this into what we do? And Rob, this is an ongoing conversation of whether that can be done, or whether or not you can integrate that technology into a legacy church. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. I think it's probably good to try, because we learn from it, even if we don't. But I think in the future, I don't know that microchurch necessarily is the future of the church, that the church will be organized and thinking of itself in terms of microchurches. But I do think that the future of the church is networked. So whatever the church looks like in the next 20 years, it will look more like networks than institutions. It'll look more like circles than hierarchies and triangles. And as we learn this collaboration, it's going to be more like nodes in a network, mutuality and equals, and multiplier value. Like, how do we create things together, build things together? So like Brave Future is this thing that's come out of the microchurch conference, and it's just essentially it's a collaboration of micro church movements, of little small grassroots micro church city movements. Which again, even us, like Rob would know, in the conversations that the Brave Future, the movement leaders have had, we don't really want to just say we're microchurch. Like we're nobody's really up for going, we're the microchurch people, like that's too narrow. That's
It's
too
limiting.
It's too limiting. And in a sense, it's like microchurch says something. It speaks to something we all feel needs to happen right now. But if that were to evolve, if that were to change, where empowerment looks somehow different, if it needed to be more focused on business enterprise or more focused on civic engagement or something, I don't know. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that we want to think about the future in that way. I know that we want to be the people that are the R&D for the church, that are the ones that we're not scared, and we're not attached to anything, and no one's going to fire us if we try something else, So that's part of what's really good about Brave Future, is that it is itself a collaboration of equals trying to self-organize and not have hierarchies, strong hierarchies. And then also it is this R&D future thing where microchurch right now feels like an important applied technology for the church, like give the church to everybody to run in their homes or break rooms and parks and sports places and whatever, to just create the church wherever there is need. And to let people plant churches, to let ordinary people plant churches. But then also, what's next? And are we ready for what's next? And are we ready to be brave and take those steps into whatever's next? That's really, I think, the deeper commitment of this ragtag group of collaborators.
Brian, thank you for giving us this time, man. This was so rich.
Very
and
much so.
If you haven't read Brian's books, I recommend all of them. Underground Church, Microchurches, your book on calling. Is that Seasons of Calling? What's the name of it again?
6 seasons.
Yeah, highly recommended. I'm also curious. We've mentioned the flat org chart. Are there one or two other books or TED Talks or podcasts that you would say, hey, if this lit you up today, go down this rabbit hole? Any recommendations?
There's a book called Impact Networks, which is probably required reading for this. Yeah, I'd put that on the list.
Okay, haven't read that one. Gonna order it today. And if Brian, if people want to follow along with what you're doing, is there any place that they can find you, or are you,
I live on planet
incognito?
Earth. I live on planet Earth, so you can find me there.
You can Venmo Brian at.
You cannot know me. I'm on social media. I don't know, but I'm not massively accessible. But I love you all, and yeah. Can I just leave one thought before we go?
Sure.
Because this just occurred to me before I got on. I read this recently, and I thought, what an idea. What a thought. Like maybe it's because Oppenheimer came out. I don't remember, but the first atomic bomb was essentially two heavy atoms, or no, it was one heavy atom that gets split, and that's called fission. Fission, that was a fission bomb, and of course that was this massive energy release, super destructive, right? Fission, nuclear fission, that's called the atom bomb. But the innovation or evolution of that horrible technology is called fusion, where you take two light atoms and you fuse them together. And fusion, nuclear fusion, or what we would now call a nuclear bomb, is like orders of magnitude more powerful, and it's what powers the sun. So fission, breaking a heavy thing apart, versus taking light things, small things, and smashing them together, like putting them together, is what powers the stars. And to me, there's something in the natural world there that is not just a metaphor. I don't just mean it as a cool illustration. I think there's something like fundamentally true about the order of the universe that God has made, that putting small things together is exponentially more powerful than breaking something apart.
Amen.
No, that's powerful. That's a principle.
It is. I think so.
Powerful principle. Well, just thanks for dropping that little thing on us
Sorry.
as we leave here.
You can just edit that out later if you need
That little light thought.
I have one thought too. Actually, the way we got to the moon was reversing alien technology, Brian. So your whole thing on that was wrong.
Yeah, not true.
Okay, folks.
Well, hey,
Hey, thanks for joining today's conversation. If you're passionate about flattening leadership structures, equipping everyone to reach their maximum influence, and seeing simple forms of church filling networks of relationships and neighborhoods, hit subscribe. Also, rate this podcast. It really does make a difference. Pick up a copy of The Starfish and the Spirit. You can like the Starfish and the Spirit Facebook page for updates. And finally, sign up for the Starfish Learning Stream for free at thestarfishandthespirit.com.